Announcements out of the way, I'd like to introduce Dr. Csiki, Chief Commercial Officer and R&D Officer of City of Hope. Dr. Csiki will be leading us through a panel on academic industry partnerships and their impact on startup creation. With that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Csiki.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here and to host this extraordinary panel today to discuss the business of science and how we can leverage our panelists and our participants' entrepreneurial experiences in turning scientific discoveries into practice-changing therapies for our patients. Of course, over the years, scientific discoveries have resulted in many new treatments that have improved the lives of patients, but only when these discoveries are actually approved and commercialized that these treatments make a huge difference. So in this panel discussion today, we have successful cancer researchers, entrepreneurs, and key leaders in various academic roles here to provide their experience and recommendations for the audience and those tuning in who want to take their discoveries all the way to make clinical impact. So the way we've set up the panel discussion is that I'd like to invite each of the panelists to come on board to give a brief personal introduction centered around factors that influence their choice of career path, be it academia, biotech, pharma, entrepreneur, or hybrid form. And then if you could please touch also briefly upon what you're doing currently and how you view academic industry partnerships in your current innovative drug development efforts. So with that, I'd like to welcome first to the panel Dr. Sunil Sharma, who is the Deputy Director of TGen and also a professor in the TGen City of Hope Alliance. Welcome, Dr. Sharma.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much, Ildiko, for inviting me to this panel. I appreciate it. I kind of feel like one of the least qualified amongst all the panelists here. So I'll try to be very brief here. I'm actually an oncologist, a medical, cancer doctor, and I work both at TGen, which is based in Phoenix, Arizona, as well as in City of Hope, which, as you know, is in Los Angeles. And my career path has been, safe to say, fairly convoluted. I started out in traditional academic medicine and then spent actually about 4 years in Novartis, which is, as you know, a big pharma company leading up their early drug development portfolios, and then returned back to academic medicine with the hopes of actually catalyzing some of the academic industry partnerships. On the entrepreneurial side, our lab actually works primarily on drug discovery, initially some small molecule drug discovery, but lately more cellular therapies. And in terms of startup kind of activities, I'm a founder of 3 different biotechnology companies that range from VC funding to public markets to privately held. So that's my background. I'm really happy to join. I'm happy to be of any help to anybody here. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Next, we have Dr. Marybeth Campbell, who is the Director of Corporate Partnerships at Caltech. Welcome.
Thank you. And I'm just glad to be here. I think, like Sunil, I feel like I'm probably the least qualified on this panel. But as Ildiko said, I'm the Director of Corporate Partnerships within Caltech's Office of Technology Transfer and Corporate Partnerships, OTTCP as we call it. And we're sort of the equivalent of UCLA's TDG. And just for some context, within the office, we have a group that focuses on the traditional technology transfer, working with our faculty and students as they're performing research, developing inventions, deciding which of those inventions to patent or copyright, and then doing the transactional work, the license negotiations with startups or established companies. Then we also have a group that now more formally supports startup creation, both in terms of providing guidance on potential technology applications or business model guidance, but also managing our internal funding programs for startup creation, both a a translational grant program that we operate, as well as a new seed fund that makes equity investments in Caltech startups. And then the group that I lead, Corporate Partnerships, is relatively new to Caltech. And what we do is we focus on building and maintaining really strategic research alliances with established companies. So across Caltech, I mean, there are dozens of companies that are sponsoring research, collaborating with our groups in research. But what my group really focuses on are those relationships that are multifaceted, that are going to involve sponsored research, philanthropy, potentially joint appointments, sharing of people both ways, sharing of resources, use of facilities at both spots, even student internships, very complex types of relationships. And I think that Caltech and our corporate partners have found that these types of strategic alliances are extremely valuable on both sides. I think not only just for the two parties, but also in terms of some of the things that we're going to be talking about today in terms of startup creation. So me personally, I have been at Caltech for 9 years. I started on the tech transfer side before heading up the corporate partnerships group about 4 years ago. And then I came, before Caltech, I spent time in DC doing science policy work. And I was in Washington, DC at the height of the Great Recession. And so a lot of the projects focused on how to get more return on investment from federally funded research, how to move the results of federally funded research out into the hands of entrepreneurs and companies to stimulate economic development. And even before that, I got my PhD actually in applied physics, working in a lab that was trying to develop devices for ultra-fast DNA sequencing. So, you know, I think I've always just been interested in this sort of how does science translate to society, and that's sort of where I've been. And I'm excited to be here today. I wish I wasn't sitting at my dining room table. I wish we were there in person, but I'm excited to participate in the conversation.
Thank you, Mary. Next, we have Dr. John Delaney, who's joining us from Amgen, where he oversees research technologies and collaborations. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Ildi, and nice to be here. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I've been at Amgen really my whole career. I started just after my postdoc. I was kind of a classically trained bacterial geneticist. I trained under individuals who had gotten their PhDs working on elucidating the genetic code. And so I guess I trace my lineage back to the early days of molecular biology. I started at Amgen really so that I could apply my bacterial genetics and molecular biology background to meaningful projects working to alleviate human disease. At Amgen, our mission is to treat patients with grievous diseases, looking for potential therapeutics that have broad impact and not just on patients but on society as well. This, of course, was very, very intriguing to me and continues to be so. I've always been in the biologics organization at Amgen. I've held a lot of different responsibilities, including being responsible for our large molecule therapeutic discovery platforms for about a decade. And I was also the site head of our research site near Vancouver, British Columbia for a number of years. I've always been really interested in technology and technology development and how that can be applied to therapeutic drug discovery. I recognize, and I think Amgen recognizes that just by simple mathematics, most innovation will happen external to our own research organization. And so it's very difficult, but important to take advantage of that external innovation environment to position Amgen as a leader going forward. And so a couple of years ago, I took on a new role at Amgen Research, and that is to focus full-time on innovation and technology prospecting. And so in that role, I try to work closely with universities, university departments, institutions, and other organizations to try to, first of all, understand where those departments and institutions' technology interests lie, and then trying to find those innovations that, again, will position Amgen as a leader in the field in the years and decades going forward. In this role, I work very closely with our business development and our ventures group, including the seed fund part of our ventures group. Again, trying to invest in emerging innovation. More and more, I'm also working closely with our corporate affairs and government affairs organizations as we try to understand the role of government in innovation and the intersection between government, academia, and industry. So again, I'm really super happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks again.
Thank you, John. Next, we welcome Dr. Kim-Danely, who's the Senior Vice President of Operations of Autobahn Labs.
Hi, Ildi. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks again to Amir and the group at UCLA's TDG for putting together such a phenomenal event. Really looking forward to participating in this panel. By way of background, so I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biophysics from Richard Axel's lab at Columbia. I spent some time really kind of trying to understand how to create value in our sort of ecosystem. So really, I think that's probably what informs all the decisions that I made throughout my career to get to the point where I am right now. So following my PhD, I did a postdoc in industry at Roche in Palo Alto because I really wanted to understand what it meant to do the work to accelerate or move a particular drug program forward. And so that was an incredibly informative experience. You know, following that, I spent some time at a company called Fibrogen, again at the bench, really trying to hone my skills and understand what it takes to do science and research in an industry setting. And then moved on to spend a little bit of time at UCSF, you know, sister campus to UCLA, to really unpack what it means to have value in our kind of industry. And by what I mean by that is to understand what is patentable and what technologies and assets are really have value from an intellectual property perspective, and therefore have value to companies and other organizations that can build those things and take them forward into, you know, making them into therapeutics. So in exploring that opportunity, I then moved to an organization called Breakout Labs, which was really designed to invest in early stage technologies that were coming straight out of academia. So really these things were these companies were at the intersection between biology and technology. They're all sort of cutting edge things that they're coming straight out of academia really. And my role there was as a portfolio manager to really help these companies get to the point where they were ready for Series A financing. A lot of that involved finding the right investors and developing proof of concept and doing pilot studies with larger organizations such as Amgen or other strategic partners. And so that was a really informative process in terms of, you know, teaching me what it takes to get a technology, not just from a concept into a company, and then really to create value that's useful downstream. Following that, I spent some time at a couple different platform technology companies, venture-backed companies in the Bay Area, before ultimately landing at Autobahn Labs. And so really what we're doing here at Autobahn Labs is kind of nicely situated between some of the other panelists here. So we have academic institutions and research institutions represented here on the panel. And then we have John sort of speaking on behalf of large pharma. And really what Autobahn is doing is trying to find a way to facilitate the movement of technologies and discoveries from the academic setting into the commercialization setting. And so Autobahn partners with institutions like UCLA and other academic institutions, and we've created a structure by which we can systematically work with faculty members on early stage research programs to help them turn them into companies and develop meaningful therapeutics that address unmet medical needs. And so we are really excited to be working with UCLA and to, you know, really bring in a few different aspects that are required. So really we bring intellectual capital, financial capital, and physical capital. So one of our investors and partners is Ildiko, a very well-known contract research organization based in Germany. And so what we plan to do is really to take some academic research programs. We have Ildiko come to bear and apply their capabilities and their know-how in order to advance these programs into Series A ready companies. And so it's really a delight to be able to be on this panel, because what we'll all see is that collaboration is absolutely an essential component of bringing any of these technologies to bear and really bringing meaningful treatments to patients. So thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Michelle. And our last panelist is Dr. Michael Caligiuri, who's a physician scientist as well as the president of the City of Hope National Medical Center. Welcome.
Thank you, Ildi, and pleasure to be with such a prestigious panel, and really happy to be in the program this afternoon. Hopefully can be of some help. My story, I think, is very straightforward. I am an oncologist and immunologist, and as I was coming out of my training at the Dana-Farber, sure to be a clinical bone marrow transplanter. The setting there was that you spent 2 years in the laboratory, and I hadn't been in the lab before. Went into the lab thinking, okay, at least I get to wear jeans and a flannel shirt. And went into the lab and got hooked on something called natural killer cells. That was in 1986. And I've never looked back. I've fallen in love with this lymphocyte subset in the body that is an immune surveyor against malignant transformation and some infections. And just have, for the last 30 years, 35 years, worked on characterizing the biology of human natural killer cells, why they're there, what they see, how they work, and have just continued from Dana-Farber to Roswell Park to Ohio State, and now here at City of Hope, where I've had my laboratory, and large laboratory. And what happened is that a number of the discoveries that we've made along the way have really advanced the ability to take natural killer cells into the clinic, which I won't get into today. And we started to put this together with the patent portfolio, just that we did like good academicians, filed patents before we published. And it turned out we had kind of assembled a pathway to commercialize, the possibility of commercializing natural killer cells, bringing them to the clinic with our own discoveries. And there's a couple ways to do that. I think we'll learn about this from this exciting panel. What we ended up doing was starting a small company, getting an investor, and then moving forward as we're on our way now, and it's called a crossover round, and probably ultimately an IPO. So things that Sunil has done personally. So nothing I had planned to do. I'm nearing what you'd call the final phase of my career as a scientist, and it's just that the pieces came together, and it made sense to go to the biology to try to get what we do to a large body of patients. And one needs to do that through our colleagues in industry. So it's been an exciting learning experience kind of late in my career. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and to all the panelists for their introduction and grounding, their current work. And as you all see, this is such a fantastic panel, and I think we could talk hours just on everyone's experiences about how to really enable industry academic partnerships for the benefit of patients. But we did think about some particular questions directed to each of the panelists. So I'll jump into those. And of course, if any of the other panelists have a little bit different viewpoint or would like something to add to the first answer, please go ahead. Would love to have an organic, fluid conversation, and also any additional questions from the audience are encouraged. We'll try to address them if time permits. So I'd like to start with Dr. Sharma and just ask him, how can we enable and empower academicians interested in entrepreneurship, and kind of going from there, how can we alleviate the tension that academicians face when they do research in academia, but also industry-like pursuits within an academic enterprise?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll say that things have changed dramatically in the last 15 years since I've been doing this. 15 years ago, it was almost a big anathema, I would not be using the word too strongly, to be too closely connected to industry, and was viewed as maybe you're too close to industry. But I think that the landscape has shifted, because it's now very clear that it's very difficult actually to let me summarize the scientific state right now as being super complex. So I think it's very difficult actually to make diagnostic or therapeutic discoveries in isolation. I mean, I think it's possible. I think great concepts in basic science, great advances are routinely made at great institutions like City of Hope and UCLA and others. But I think it's suffice to say, I think there's a greater and greater realization that it's much more fruitful if you purely see it as a methodology to translate your science. If the science is the output of science that you're interested in is translation, then I think having that outlet and sort of a framework for that is important. And I think obviously different institutions are sort of, I think, at different steps in this realization process. UCLA, obviously, what I've learned here is way ahead of the game here, and I've heard Stanford's way ahead of the game, and City of Hope's amazing as well. But I think different institutions may be different kind of levels or steps, but I do think that it's actually not that difficult. I think the one little comment I would make is from somebody like myself or Mike's standpoint, where we sit as physician scientists. I think it's great to be interested in all of that, but I think the idea is to kind of make the win-win argument. And the win-win argument, this is not an exclusive win-win argument, but one win-win argument would go something like this. If I were able to advance my science through partnerships, then it means that I can translate the intellectual property and technology that was developed at our institution much faster, and also will translate into more sort of peer-reviewed funding as well. So I think that is the argument I think a lot of physician scientists make. And also it's super exciting for somebody like me and Mike to actually partner with the industry. So I would I'm sure other people have views on this, so I'll stop there. But I do think the landscape has shifted.
Thank you. I would like to follow on that question by asking, Mary, how can we ensure that academics are open to and also have access to not just financial capital or resources outside of their institutions, but also the talent that is required, to have this kind of entrepreneurial mindset to move things fast to commercialization?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great question, and it sort of follows up on some of the things that Sunil said. I mean, one is that we are doing a lot of education to our faculty and students about the benefits of a collaboration with industry that go beyond just the financial resources, in the sense of that exposure to the intellectual capital and the way of thinking in industry, access to other resources. So anyone who's spent any time in academia knows that you can't make a professor do something that he or she does not want to do. So what we feel our role is kind of that exposure, and then for those who can take on that mindset of openness, then those collaborations can work well. For access, I mean, certainly there's the work that my team and I do in trying to make sure that companies are aware of the resources that Caltech has. That we're on, whatever preferred partners or master agreements that exist to try to facilitate collaborations. But I think that once the faculty and the students have that entrepreneurial mindset, and that's not necessarily just even, again, starting a company themselves, or being open to these types of collaborations, they're going out and talking at conferences, they're being approached by companies. And I just believe that those opportunities will come once they have that mindset. I think one of the things that we should hopefully we can find better ways to do is encourage this kind of cross-sector time trying different things. And I know that, from some of the panels I sat in on yesterday, there were a lot of, scientific founders who had spent time in academia and who had gone to industry. But I'd love to kind of see some mechanisms to bring that then back into academia, not that I want to speak for Ray Deshays, but if we could bring somebody like that back from Amgen, back to Caltech, I just think the more that we have people who have been in these different worlds and can kind of translate, the better. So that's what I would say.
I would agree with that, but you don't get Ray back anytime soon.
So, John, to follow up on what Marybeth talked about, what can academic places invest in, and how can they pursue drug discovery so that it's really appealing to pharma for partnerships from the very beginning to be really truly like a biotech, bringing the rigor, the speed. That's what we all want to know at academic places.
It's a great question. I think Sunil and Marybeth already touched on some of this. First of all, something that Sunil said is that some institutions, universities are very sophisticated and very mature in terms of the guidance that they provide to professors and laboratories. UCLA, City of Hope, of course. Stanford was mentioned. Others are quite good. Caltech, of course. But there are other universities that are not so sophisticated. And I think what those institutions need to invest in is some like a translation, a medicinal translation center, so that there are mechanisms by which faculty and students, postdocs, can learn from those institutions how to translate their idea or their molecule or their asset into a therapeutic, or if it's a technology-based thing, how to create that technology and develop it so that industry can actually use it. Part of that, I suppose, is partnering with pharma early, to get input and advice and maybe even money to help develop those assets or technologies. I've seen a lot of great ideas. I've seen fewer ideas that are actually translatable into an asset or a technology platform that pharma could take advantage of. The other thing I would say is that there are a lot of great ideas, and I'm seeing, and I agree that the environment is changing, and people are more aware, I think now of or maybe open to the idea of partnering with industry. There's also a lot of venture capital available to people and small companies with great ideas. But again, the problem seems to be in one of translation. And Mike and Sunil have great experience in doing just that, translating ideas into tangible assets, but not everybody does. And so I think universities need to invest in mechanisms to take advantage of people like Mike and Sunil. It also sounds like Autobahn is a great platform which would help transition ideas from the academic setting into a industry setting. And so I'm interested to hear more about that, actually. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with everything. We have a similar mechanism that we've established at City of Hope called the R&D hybrid, which essentially that's exactly what it does. It translating scientific discoveries with commercial intent, meaning can it get to patients as fast as possible while the commercial landscape, the market is still open for that. There is that need. To follow up on your comments, John, I'd really love to hear from Michelle, especially as she brings, that key financial piece that is still so important for translating for the benefit of patients. So, Michelle, I guess my specific question is, how can we support the academicians to make connections with the people who have experience with startups, with connection with venture capitalists, who can also who will bring the financial capital, but also intellectual capital to the table, meaning they'll help create the right management team to drive the company forward?
Thanks for the question. I think there's a number of different mechanisms by which you can really, facilitate the conversations, and especially with respect to academics, get them more comfortable with the concept of working with an industry partner, right? That certainly, as others have alluded to, the sort of climate has changed over time. There's not so much of the dark side element of working with industry. There's now kind of a recognition that there's real value, but also it's absolutely critical for the development of novel technologies and discoveries that you have multiple viewpoints. We've seen across biology and chemistry, multidisciplinary approaches to hard problems are super important. I think if you sort of orthogonally shift that concept, what you really want to have is that you have multiple perspectives early on in an academic program, whether it be the investors, whether it be the pharmaceutical partners, all sorts of folks really thinking about how to accelerate the science and move it into a state that is de-risked from a scientific and technical perspective. And so to your specific question of how do we really kind of support and facilitate these interactions, I think there's a number of different ways that you could do it. So one is, this is a great example, right? So this sort of event and conference that UCLA has put together is a great forum for connecting different people and different stakeholders within the ecosystem. I think that's a key element. So, as I think some folks at the TDG said when they were, sort of envisioning this conference, it's really about bringing the right people in the room, and the magic will happen. The connections will happen. The people will follow up with each other and facilitate those conversations. I think another kind of unique idea that I'd seen in the past, or one of my alma maters, Cornell, really actually had a very unique format for facilitating these conversations, and it was to really leverage their alumni, right? UCLA in particular and other institutions have a variety of people that have gone on to different parts and aspects of this ecosystem, whether they be at companies or investors themselves. And so around JP Morgan, they would effectively set up an event in which they connected their scientists and their entrepreneurs with the investors from their alumni pool. And I think that's a great way to have that kind of connection. Those folks are already interested and invested in making sure that institution, continues to grow and thrive. So I think that's another way to do that. And then the final way is, obviously, I'm a supporter of our model, right, which is to build a partnership and a collaboration with institutions that really has a long-term vision around how to build a relationship, not only with the institutions and the technology transfer offices, but also with the individual faculty members. Because at the end of the day, as we've seen repeatedly across industries, successful companies are really built on successful partnerships and people working together very collaboratively. I asked, I think, Amir early on what he thought the critical element of success was for some of the companies and the technologies that he's seen. And he said it really came down to a core team of really passionate people that are devoted to bringing and championing a program and bringing it forward, because everything will have struggles and challenges, right? But it's about bringing the people together that can work and think collaboratively about how to advance that therapeutic. So hopefully that sort of answers your questions in some way about how to really facilitate that conversation between academics and industry partners and investors.
Thank you. And Mike, I have a couple of questions for you, both stemming like at an individual level, but also in your role as overseeing our medical center. First, if you can touch upon, how important is the collaboration between academia and industry in translating these therapies, and how can the academic entrepreneurs find this right balance between, like yourself, between research, patient care, and the business of science aspect, and then also thinking about at an enterprise level, how, as we're moving toward the future, how can enterprises like our own and universities, nonprofit organizations maintain their core mission in a future where there's going to be lots of incubators, accelerators, spin-out companies, and these are becoming sort of the norm. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics. I think you're on mute.
Talking with my hands, but being mute. That's a trick I've got to learn. So I think generally, just to take all of your questions and kind of roll them into, like you said, in my position as a researcher, physician, and head of the medical center here, one of the things that brought me to City of Hope is that there's a strong awareness of the gift of academic industry collaborations and the necessity in an ever-changing world where in healthcare, we in oncology are seeing a race to the bottom in terms of reimbursement often. And, in the C-suite, you're sitting there wondering, how can we continue to make our margins, which are so critical to fuel our research on, in a health system which does not necessarily reward quality. And I don't mean for every type of payer, but it's common now that if you're doing care with world-class experts like Dr. Sharma, who do a very specific cancer and that's all they do and that's all they're going to do and they're world-class experts in it, it takes more investment on the part of the organization and you need to recover that investment. So as that gets harder and harder, as organizations, we have to look for other streams of revenue. And we have to learn to diversify. The days, as Dr. Sharma said in the beginning, the days of, kind of academic institute just counting on great reimbursement and just strong departments with lots of resources to promote academic careers, those are largely over with maybe a couple of exceptions. So the sooner those in the hierarchy of the organization recognize, how do I maintain that influx of resources to support the endeavors of my faculty, whatever their endeavors are, teaching, research, interactions with industry, patient care, the better they are. And I found the move to City of Hope very entrepreneurial attitude. As you probably are aware, the invention of human insulin here, a long time ago, was the foundation for the biotechnology, which Genentech was formed. The first recombinant product was the human insulin that was invented here at City of Hope, and then recombinant antibodies invented here at City of Hope, Genentech. So, just to be candid, City of Hope has reaped tremendously from those two inventions. So they have an attitude, they want to stay fiercely independent, and they want to keep moving, they want to move with speed. Not all universities are like that. They're more, they might be a bit more locked into educational needs and commitments. If, say, it's a state university, they might have more commitments to, other undergraduate endeavors that also cost a lot of money and are very important investments. So, and your president might not necessarily care for or be all that interested in her or his medical center. And if you don't have a dean or a senior vice president that's kind of, got this in mind, front of mind, you lose, and those faculty end up growing up unaware of what's out there. And for me personally, getting to a personal level, you asked about, I just was frustrated where I was that I couldn't move quickly. And I realized that I was surrounded by people who were complaining. We put so much money into the Office of Technology Transfer. We don't see any return, not understanding the whole notion of a long-term commitment to this and all the people you need in the pipeline. It's an investment. And of course, like anything else, there's risk, but you can mitigate the risk depending on the way you do it. And part of that risk can be mitigated by strong relationships with industry. In the end, it's, do I know John? Can I give him a call? Hey, John, you know me. I know you from, we did that trial with Amgen. Could I talk to you about something? We'll sign an NDA. Oh, we've got NDAs with Amgen. You're covered. That's very different from, where do I go and not having senior mentors that just don't know how to find your way, and people like Sunil, who's been, an academic all his life and then did a stint at Novartis, that's invaluable because, of course, he's been on both sides and can help people navigate. But that's not common. So to those listening, you got to ask yourself, what environment am I in? Who's here to teach me? What is the attitude? What's the culture, the ethos? And if you're in a place where, they're poo-pooing, putting in IP, they not hiring the right teams, it's really, really slow, you might not be in the right place for, if that's your interest in, as it was mine, getting something into patients, because you can't do it without biotech industry and resources.
Thank you, Mike. That was very helpful, and we had actually had so many questions, but we had asked a number of questions into one question of the panelists. So I think we were able to actually cover a large ground. But we do have a couple of questions from the audience, so I'd like to put them out there, also being conscious that this is a very short panel. Unfortunately, we are just 5 minutes away from the end. So there were a couple of questions. I'll ask them. I think they are directed to John, but anyone else, please jump in as well. So, John, you had mentioned that university-based medicinal translational centers could be very valuable in advancing discoveries with commercialization. And would industry partners or someone like you be open to sharing some successful ones or some examples? Or what if there is a particular recipe that academic centers could use to set up a successful one?
So the answer, well, first of all, I'll say I don't know that there is a recipe as such. If only it were that easy. But the answer to the first part of the question is absolutely. I think people from industry would be more than happy to sit on, a board of a translational center. A translational medicine center at a university would be crazy not to. And so, I personally would find that very rewarding. But also, I think it would be useful to have industry input in, such an organization or center. And I'd like to hear what other people think about that as well.
This is Sunil. Yeah, I think there are... UCSF has a nice sort of effort there. I think that it is very difficult, like John was saying, because I think medicinal chemistry that is relevant. Just want to touch on a brief thing here. I think somebody said that before. I think John himself said, I think it's great that, the ideas are wonderful, but I think the translational space really is defined by turning ideas into actually products. Products sort of seems like very crass in the academic side, but it's true that, whether it's a diagnostic test or a drug or whatever antibody, there's a lot of things that go into that translational space. So I think, one little part of it is medicinal chemistry, and that is important if you're doing small molecule drug discovery. But what I have seen is also some pitfalls around the target itself. The realization whether most often when you talk to big pharma, I think their questions center a lot around validation of targets and the importance of targets. So I think that might be something you want to think about, because people as academicians, we sometimes spend a large amount of our time on narrow pursuits, which may be very rewarding intellectually and from a basic science perspective, but whether they can be translated into something useful is sometimes a big question. So target validation, and maybe John can talk, or Michelle and others can talk a little bit about target validation is, I think, as big a problem as medicinal chemistry itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree that, one of the key things that any investor or pharmaceutical partner is going to do when they're presented with a great set of discoveries and novel technology is really to kick the tires and ensure that there's replication of the initial biological finding, right? Is there relevance? Is it present? Does it make sense in clinical settings? Are there patients that have that sort of that kind of profile that makes sense? Does the biology hang together? So one of the things that we do at Autobahn is really to provide up to $5 million. And one of the aspects that we do first is really to kind of do a proof of concept and validate the target to ensure that the medicinal chemistry efforts that follow are really going after something that's meaningful. But with respect to kind of the earlier comments in terms of what are other sort of, factors or elements to success, so what I've seen in terms of talking to other institutions where they do have maybe a medicinal chemistry effort or a screening core, what I think goes really well hand in hand, and UCLA is a great example of having this, and other institutions clearly have it as well, is to go hand in hand with some sort of initial funding mechanism. So there may be an innovation ventures kind of a funding program. Oftentimes it's to the tune of roughly 250,000 or 100,000, just to really provide some funding to support that effort. Maybe it'll involve some of those de-risking or target validation studies, but then it also supports medicinal chemistry efforts. And so I think that's a really nice complement when you have a screening facility and then you have a mechanism by which you can fund it so that the faculty members are not relying solely upon government funding to move those programs forward. So I think that's maybe another suggestion for folks that are thinking about building an MTC.
Thank you very much. Well, I think this was really wonderful. I wish we had much longer, but I think the questions that we received are very helpful and were sort of answered in a bundled way. Again, I think please to the attendees continue to reach out to the organizers, to the panelists. We have several mechanisms in place at City of Hope for exactly tackling some of these questions, and really looking forward to continuing this discussion. I think this is something that we have to continue, and hopefully even more in the real setting as life resumes post-COVID, and really establish these very close collaborations between industry, academia, and government, as well as John described. So thank you all again for your participation, enthusiasm. I think it was very valuable, very enjoyable, and looking forward to talking again soon.